Chapter 22, Baby. Sean grew more distant and seemed to be able to ignore my pain. When we had first started dating, I told him I didn't want to get married. I just wanted to live together without children. Now I was lonely and grew to resent him for wanting to get married and have this child. I felt so angry. I had given him everything he asked for, and now I was stuck and alone. A month after losing my mom, I gave birth to our son and named him Hudson. He was truly a blessing. Being his mom gave me a beautiful new purpose in life. I no longer felt trapped. Caring for Hudson kept me busy and helped me get through the pain of losing my mother. Still, I struggled without her. How I longed to ask my mom questions and share precious moments with her. A few times I dialed her number on my cell phone to tell her something funny that happened. Instantly, I felt sick to my stomach as the harsh reality hit me that she was never going to answer me ever again. Only after she died did I realize why she had stared at Hudson's ultrasound picture so much. She knew she would never meet him. Sadly, it all made sense now. Life without mom became more than I could bear. For someone who could cook and clean the entire day while I was 8 months pregnant, I could no longer function. I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't want to live in my house anymore. Every wall reminded me of mom. The faint sound of a train rolling by, which I had never noticed before, was all I could hear. It all reminded me of her, and I wanted every reminder to stop. If I owned it before her death, I wanted it gone. It was irrational. Maybe if I leave this house, I won't think about her all the time. Sean and I had wanted a bigger house for Hudson to grow up in anyway, so we put the house up for sale and moved across town. It didn't get any better. I kept myself extremely busy, practically remodeling the new home and painting every wall myself out of pure anxiety. Exactly 12 months after my mom had passed away, I crashed. I told my doctor I just couldn't do it anymore. "It's okay," she said. "Maybe you just need a little something to help you grieve." She prescribed me anti-anxiety pills I could take when the unshakable anxiety consumed me. I reached out to my cousin Heather, who was living in the Midwest. She immediately came to live with me to help me cook, clean, and run the household so I could just relax. "You're not doing the laundry. You're not allowed to do a single dish," Heather would tell me. I got to grieve the loss of my mom and care for Hudson without all of the other burdens of running a house. I only took a pill when I felt out of control, and it would bring my unbearable anxiety down a few notches so I could function. Within a few weeks, I didn't need those pills anymore, and Heather eventually moved out. But that time with her was a gift of healing to me, which I am still grateful for. Chapter 23, Returning to JW's. When Sean and I met, we were both disfellowshipped. I liked that we had both been raised in the religion, and so to a certain extent, we understood each other's backgrounds. Neither of us had missed being Jehovah's Witnesses, but as Hudson was getting older, Sean became devastated he couldn't talk with his family. "Let's do what we need to do for 6 months and get reinstated," I suggested. "But we don't believe it," he said. "They're not God. They don't know what's in our heart," I assured him. Together we went to the congregation meetings faithfully so the elders would consider letting us back in. It was so hard to attend meeting after meeting, sitting in a back room segregated from the main congregation because no one could talk to us. But if going back to the Jehovah's Witness religion and playing by their rules was the only way to have our friends and family back in our lives, we were willing to do it. For 6 months, we attended weekly meetings without missing one. Then we requested the elders meet with us to decide if we could be reinstated. We were soon welcomed back with a big announcement and had Sean's family back in our lives. We rarely attended meetings after that. To the church and outside world, we looked like the religious family who had gotten it all together, but behind closed doors, we were falling apart. At home, I would play with our son while Sean stared at the television, drinking beer after beer. It became routine for him to come home around 3 p.m., drink an energy shake, work out for 2 hours, drink a glass of water, down 6 shots of hard alcohol, and finish the night with 7 beers. We came to an agreement that he would only smoke in the shed so Hudson wouldn't have to see it. He assured me his drug use was limited to alcohol, cigarettes, and the occasional consumption of weed. And I believed him. On a Tuesday night, Sean was out late, so I took 1-year-old Hudson with me to a meeting at the Kingdom Hall. We had just pulled out of the parking lot when I noticed a woman and her young daughter walking down the sidewalk. I recognized her as the disfellowship woman who never spoke to anyone and sat in the same back room we used to sit in. It was dark and there was nothing around for miles. In the past, I'd seen her drive a Lexus SUV, and I could not fathom why on earth she would be walking at night in high heels, holding the hand of her 3-year-old daughter. I pulled my conversion van into an abandoned driveway which led to an open field just kitty-corner to the Kingdom Hall and got out to meet her. "Why are you walking?" I asked. She told me, "My daughter locked my keys in the car before tonight's meeting, and I didn't have time to wait for someone to get them out." She explained that if she missed a meeting, the elders would prolong her privilege to become part of the congregation again. She had walked to the meeting and intended to walk home. I couldn't believe I was part of a religion that would let a mom and her 3-year-old walk home at night by themselves rather than offer a ride, all because of their rules and regulations. I knew what the elders would tell me, too. It'd be something to the effect of, "Well, you don't know that God wouldn't have put it on someone else's heart to help if you hadn't stepped in. It was always somebody else's job to care." I was pissed, but I kept that to myself. "Get in my van. I'm taking you home," I told her. "Oh, I don't know if you can do that. I'm disfellowshipped," she said. "What's going to happen?" I asked her. "Are my wheels not going to turn? Is God going to stop my van from running so I can't take you home?" She laughed and got in with her daughter. "I could never live with myself if I found out something happened to you two and I didn't stop to give you a ride," I told her. It was not safe for a woman and child to be walking at night in Mesa, Arizona. After I dropped her and her daughter off, I felt so alive and so good for helping her. I knew I could be in trouble for speaking to her or giving her a ride if any of the Jehovah's Witnesses driving past us decided to make an issue about it to the congregation elders. A strength passed through me, and I felt peace. I didn't care what happened to me. I trusted myself and knew I had made the right decision when I gave her and her daughter a ride. I had a moment of revelation. "God, I don't know where you are, but I know you're not in this religion." I could finally see that the Jehovah's Witness teachings were against the very grain within me. My whole life, I had believed if I didn't agree with the Jehovah's Witness teachings, then I needed to change how I felt. After that night, I knew I needed to search for God and ask Him to guide me to Him. I suddenly cared what the truth really was, and I wanted to know God more than ever. I'm not all bad and wicked like the Jehovah's Witnesses keep telling me. I'm done beating myself up for being a sinner. I wanted to learn how God could help me. He created me, and I wanted to know what He felt about me, not what the elders said. I didn't know what to do about it, but I had a new resolve to find God. Chapter 24, Fix This. My loneliness became an everyday discussion with my husband. "Even when you're here, you're not here," I told Sean. I need more than a body to sleep with at night. I need a connection with someone." "Okay, then go get a boyfriend," he said. I rolled my eyes at his proposal. Maybe having another baby will help, I thought. I begged for another child. Eventually, he relented and we began trying for a second baby. Throughout my marriage, I had been asked out by many men at work. I had always declined and let them know I was happily married. But one Friday evening, I decided to go out on a date before I went home. I was desperate to feel something. I wanted to forget I had a husband and just have fun. I was tired of my life and exhausted from not getting what I needed at home. Obviously, Sean doesn't care, or he wouldn't have suggested it, I justified to myself. This other man was also married, and we were quickly involved in an ongoing affair. Lying and scheming, we went to great trouble to see each other. My husband must have known I had someone else because I would show up late from work on Fridays, and when I would go out with my girlfriends, he could never get a hold of me. Sean would tell me, "I'm going out for the night. You should call your boyfriend." "I will, thanks," I'd respond. When I came home late, it was always because I'd been with the other man. Don't tell me who it is, my husband would tell me. Every time Sean suspected me of sleeping with someone else, we would have sex. It was our twisted way of making up, I guess. Nothing about our marriage was healthy or right, but we didn't argue anymore, so I felt we had found what worked for us. Soon I was pregnant, and I dreamed of this baby bringing Sean and me closer together. I dumped my boyfriend and put all my energy into my marriage. This pregnancy was terrible. In fact, it almost killed me. I was on bed rest, and Sean never even bothered to offer me a glass of water. When he was home, he sat drinking and watching television while his mother cared for me and Hudson. I realized what a loser I had married and gave up trying with him. When my second son was born, I named him Jacoby. He was the sweetest tempered, cutest little baby. Sean continued doing his own thing, so I carried on like a single mother who shared a house with an addict. Even with my two sons, I felt lonely and tried to fill the void with a fuller house. I placed an ad on Craigslist and began babysitting a pediatrician's 5-month-old boy while caring for my own toddler and newborn. Staying busy kept me from feeling the loneliness of my failing marriage. Sean and I coexisted without focusing on the parts of our relationship which clearly weren't working. I didn't want to continue with our same cycle, but I wasn't sure what to do. When Jacoby was 5 months old, I realized he looked exactly like my ex-boyfriend. That night, I sat my husband down and told him I didn't think our youngest son was his. He was in denial and insisted Jacoby was his son. We talked for hours about how messed up our lives were and all the mistakes we had made, and then he took me and our two boys to my favorite Mexican restaurant for a normal dinner, like everything was just fine. It seemed no matter what either of us did, we were always there to look the other way. It was unreal and certainly not a healthy marriage. A few months later, I put Jacoby down for a nap and opened our bedroom doors to find Sean snorting white powder off of one of my cutting boards. He looked surprised to see me and nervously held out a straw in his hand to offer me some. I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. That moment rattled my entire world. I screamed at him, "What are you doing? Don't you know we have kids? What is that?" He laughed and told me it was crushed Percocet. I love doing drugs. It makes me feel good. Sean admitted to smoking marijuana regularly at work and snorting cocaine a few times. But he said his favorite was prescription pills, especially crushed Percocet. I finally knew why I felt lonely, why we didn't connect, why he always disappeared, and why he was not there even when he was physically present. He was high. I wanted our marriage to work, but I didn't want to be married to a drug addict or an alcoholic. I definitely drink too much at times, but I can stop when I need to. I just want Sean to do the same. I begged him to please give up the drugs and alcohol so we could be a family. Sean and I got along so well, but our day-to-day life was anything but good. I was confused as to which step to take next and decided to see a counselor for help figuring it out. I met with a wonderful woman a few times who was able to quickly identify why I was in this marriage. She helped me see that my marriage was a recreation of the dysfunctional relationship I had with my dad. Growing up, my dad would molest me and I couldn't tell anyone, but I could act out in any way I wanted and get away with it. I got to do what I wanted because he got to do what he wanted, and I was reenacting that pattern in my current marriage. It angered me to realize I was reliving my past. I was angry at myself. I knew I had landed in an abusive relationship with my first marriage because I had been used to being a sex object as a child. But I thought I had found a good guy when I married Sean. He wasn't perfect, but he was nice and never abused me. However, I was realizing that was not enough for our marriage to work. How do I pick a good guy? I asked my counselor. Certain things throw up red flags, but I don't know if they mean turn right or turn left. How can I tell if they are deal breakers or not? I asked. She helped me first understand that, considering my past, it's okay not to know how to pick a good guy. She also taught me to take more time getting to know the guys I dated. I felt empowered to listen more carefully to myself and to trust myself. For now, I was staying with Sean, but she gave me the tools and confidence I needed to go start over if that's what I one day chose to do. A few months later, I was watching my boys play in their room when I was overcome with sadness. We had a beautiful home with mahogany wood floors and a kid's room filled with stuffed animals and covered with surfboard wallpaper. Hudson slid down his plastic slide and then ran back up to go again. Jacoby sat quietly, a calm and chubby blonde with curly hair, completely unaware of the mess he was born into. Those little boys were being raised by two idiots, and their lives were a mess. In that moment, my sin crushed me. Because of me, the boys were not fully biological brothers. And because of me, they were living in complete dysfunction. I looked at sweet Jacoby's innocent face and I realized that the poor boy had no one in the world but me. And I knew I had to get it right for him. I gave Sean one last chance to get it together. We had a coming clean moment where we both laid it all out there and decided to try to do things right. He committed to giving up drugs and alcohol. He even poured out all of his alcohol down the drain and stayed home more. Even though we didn't want to be Jehovah's Witnesses, we began attending meetings together again. We even started studying the Bible together at home. We were talking more and things seemed to be getting better. Less than 1 month later, Sean came home with a large case of beer. He sat down at the dinner table and announced, "I know I have a drinking problem, but I don't think it's that big of an issue. I know lots of people who drink way more than I do, and they still function fine." He proceeded to pull out a beer and drink it. I didn't say anything, but that was it for me. It was completely clear that this wasn't going to work out, and I refused to continue living like this. It may not seem like much of a revelation to the average person, but this was the first time that I realized people will show you who they are, and I really grabbed a hold of the power I had to change my circumstances. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to do something. I wasn't having an affair anymore, and I wasn't the one drinking and doing drugs, but I had to fix this. I can't change my husband, but I can change myself. I was going to give my sons a stable home to live in, a home where they could feel safe and loved, a home they could grow up feeling proud of. I had one mission: create a better life for my boys. How was I going to do this? I had no idea, but I figured physically removing us from my husband had to be a step in the right direction. Chapter 25, Change is Coming. It took Sean 3 weeks to buy a beer after supposedly giving it up, and only 1 week for me to find a new place to live. I had secured a new job, and when I felt I had my ducks in a row, I told Sean I would be filing for a divorce. He took it well and without argument. We had a calm conversation and fell asleep. When I awoke the following morning, Hudson was gone. Sean had never taken Hudson without telling me, and he wasn't the type to plan outings with the boys. I tried not to worry at first, but my gut was telling me this was serious, and I should be concerned. I tried calling Sean, but he didn't answer. That was strange. I started to panic. I looked around the house for anything that could give me a clue as to what was going on. I opened the garage door. No cars! I felt physically sick. How could he drive 2 cars by himself? I opened the garage door and walked out to find our other 2 cars were gone too. Now I knew this was bad. I just didn't know how bad or how long it would last. My next thought was my inheritance. I ran to check my sock drawer, and he had taken all of my cash. The last $16,000 of the inheritance from my mom was gone. The cash stashed throughout the house was gone. Later that day, I walked to the bank with Jacoby and found out he had drained our checking and savings accounts too. I had a rush of emotions wash over me. I was angry, scared, and dangerously mad. I could literally imagine killing him for taking our son. I could care less about the money, but I needed to know where Hudson was. I wanted him back, and I wanted him back now. I called the police to report Hudson missing and was told that since he was likely with his father, there was nothing I could legally do to get him back. As the father, your husband is entitled to have your son just as you are. They didn't care that I didn't know where he was or that I may never see him again. I was told I would need a court order signed by a judge to clearly state when each parent's parenting time was. What? I hadn't even filed for divorce, let alone petition a court for parenting time. I was suddenly crushed. I realized it could be months or even a year before I saw Hudson again. He's only 2. Will he even know me after all this is over? My Uncle Joey had come to visit the day before Sean up and left. His entire trip became about helping me resolve this mess. It was clear Sean intended to use Hudson as a bargaining piece, and he would not be bringing him back anytime soon. Jacoby was sick and needed medicine, but I didn't have 1 penny to my name. Joey bought us food and took care of us his whole visit. He acted as the mediator between me and Sean to at least get me $3,500 to tie me over before my first paycheck. I borrowed a car from my stepdad for my first week of work and later spent the little money Sean had given me on a used car I found on Craigslist. I was determined not to fight with Sean, and I didn't care about the money. Let him take it. That's the last $16,000 he'll ever see in one place, I told myself. I'm moving on to better things, and I'll earn my own living without spending a penny taking him to court. I was hell-bent on moving forward without him stealing another moment of my life. About a month later, Jacoby and I had found our new normal living in an apartment across town. I got a call from Sean saying his parents were driving back to Arizona from their hometown in Wisconsin. They'll be coming around noon on Saturday to drop Hudson off at your apartment, he told me. I was so relieved. I refused to give his parents the satisfaction of knowing how much I wanted to kill them for taking my child. When their van pulled up, I greeted them with a smile and thanked them for taking care of my baby. God definitely gave me the strength I needed to do that. On my own, I could never be so kind. Hudson and I picked up where we had left off, excited to be back together. I never wanted to let either of the boys out of my sight again, but I had to work full-time and make our new improved lifestyle work. Each morning, I dropped Hudson and Jacoby off with a babysitter I trusted. I filed for divorce and stopped going to Jehovah's Witness meetings. As I was moving a carload of stuff I had brought from the house to my apartment, a pair of Mormon missionaries knocked at my door. Normally, I wouldn't have entertained a conversation with them, but since I'd spent my weekends knocking on doors as a witness, I thought I would give them a chance to share their beliefs. They had a message of hope, and it was very loving. I accepted an in-home Bible study with them, and over the next 8 months, we met at my place every other week for what they called discussions. I had no furniture, so we sat in a circle on the floor. Against my better judgment, I eventually converted to Mormonism. I knew it was wrong to accept the Book of Mormon as the gospel. I knew the Bible said not to add or take away from the scriptures, but I was in love with this sanctuary full of families and people who seemed to truly enjoy gathering on Sundays to praise God. It was refreshing to me. I loved how I felt. There were no back rooms for disfellowship people, and if someone in the church was struggling, they were right there ready to help. They regularly offered food, comfort, prayer, childcare, and even money to people who were in need. I was so impressed with how loving these people were. From what I could tell, they were the complete opposite of the Jehovah's Witnesses. When Sean learned I had been baptized as a Mormon, his mom convinced him to report me to the Jehovah's Witnesses and have me disfellowshipped. I didn't care. It was all so petty to me. Sean had our second son DNA tested when he was 2 months old, and the results stated he was 99.9% not the biological father. At first, Sean remained in Jacoby's life and wanted to be a dad to him. But the more we both moved on with our lives, the more impossible that became for him. The next few years were the hardest of my entire life. The boys were constantly split up for visits. It was extremely difficult managing finances, cooking, cleaning, laundry, working, and caring for the boys. I was so skinny and exhausted from trying to keep everyone happy. I wanted to be a good employee so I could make more money. I wanted to be a good mom, so I tried to make every moment with them full of fun. I wanted to be a better person, so I prayed to know God. One afternoon, I went to pick up my boys from the babysitter, and only Jacoby was there. The babysitter told me, Sean called and said his mom was coming to pick up Hudson. They left about an hour ago. My heart dropped, and I panicked. I called the police to report my son kidnapped, but legally, there was nothing they could do. I was devastated and forced to wait for my court date, which was an agonizing 9 months away. I would drive to the Kingdom Hall and see Sean and his mom walking into meetings with my son. But I had been advised by law enforcement that should I make a scene and take my son back, I would be the one in legal trouble and risk losing custody of Hudson altogether. I would sit in my car and just cry from the deepest parts of my heart. I had never been so crushed, so angry, or so hurt. About a month before our divorce court hearing, Sean called me and said he was sorry for taking Hudson. He offered to meet me at a park to let me see him. It had been 6 months since I'd last seen Hudson, and he was only 2 years old when he was taken for the second time. When I laid eyes on him, I teared up and bent down to offer a hug. He didn't want to hug me. He didn't know me. Sean offered to let him come home with me, but Hudson wouldn't come. I was so broken inside. I'd never experienced anything so painful in my life. That weekend, I called Sean and told him I wanted to pick up Hudson. Even if Hudson didn't recognize me yet, I knew he needed to be with me. Sean told me his mom was watching Hudson at his great-grandma's house in Mesa, so I drove over there and knocked on the door. She handed Hudson over without any clothes, shoes, toys, or anything. She looked upset that I was there. I smiled and told her, "Thank you for taking such good care of my son." After that, I had Hudson on weekends and usually on the weekdays and usually on the weekends too, because Sean wanted to party. Although I had a strong desire to create a better home for my boys, I lacked the emotional intelligence to make it a reality. I spent the next year on a binge of drinking, dating, sleeping around, sneaking around with married men, flirting, and toying with the idea of settling down. I didn't have the self-esteem to find a man who would treat me well, so I settled for what was offered and made excuses for what I didn't get. Finally, one of these men captured my heart. I learned I wasn't completely broken, that I actually could be monogamous. I thought I had found the real deal this time, and when he cheated on me, I was done. Done living like this, done with my disgusting lifestyle, and done waiting to be chosen by the next man. I could feel a strength, a glimmer of self-esteem beginning to emerge out of the depths of my dark soul. I was going to choose my next move. Chapter 26, Running. It was a warm, sunny Saturday morning, and instead of grabbing my phone to start my usual shenanigans, I grabbed my running shoes and iPod. I had never been a runner, but something inside me told me this is what I needed. As I stepped outside onto the sidewalk, I leaned forward into a slow jog and then fast run. Each step felt like a choice in the right direction. It was hard, and I didn't feel I could make it. But the music in my ears kept me from hearing how hard I was breathing, and I pressed on. Running became my new thrill. Instead of choosing random men to waste my time with, I chose to spend time with myself, running from my past into an unknown future. As I ran 2 to 3 miles a night in the 100-degree desert heat, I learned I was stronger than I thought, not just physically, but mentally as well. At 31 years old, I was in the best shape of my life, and I had landed a high-paying sales job. I was hopeful about the future when another blow came. Sean neglected to pay credit card debts he was legally bound to by our divorce agreement. He was opening credit cards, borrowing cash against the cards to buy drugs, and never paying the bills. He avoided his wages from being garnished or having a lien against his home by working for his parents for cash and putting his house in his dad's name. One day, a nice guy in the HR department asked me into his office to inform me my wages were going to be garnished to the tune of $1,500 per paycheck to pay Sean's $80,000 debt. I couldn't afford to make those payments. They would have destroyed me. I have a good bankruptcy lawyer. That's the only way out of this mess, he told me. I was devastated, but I left work early that day and hired her. I ended up losing my car in the bankruptcy. Before the tow truck arrived, I went to a dealer and finally bought my long overdue dream car, a brand new Volkswagen GTI in gray. I didn't have the cash to buy a car, but I got approved at an incredibly high interest rate. Because I was making so much money, I could afford the outrageous monthly payments. With my successful career and breakaway from my mistakes, I finally felt I had the reins to my own life. I'd quadrupled the sales goals and was accredited with saving the company. The only problem was that I didn't get to spend much time with my boys, who were now 4 and 2. They pretty much lived at the sitter's house. At one point, I hired a live-in nanny. In addition to a normal 40-hour work week, I worked almost most weekends and evenings. It was also on call. I justified the hours because when I did have time off, I was able to take my boys to restaurants, buy them clothes, and get them any toys they wanted. Through various board meetings and vacations over the years to escape the blazing Arizona heat, I had traveled to California and fallen in love with the area. My dream of moving to the West Coast grew with each trip. I put together a proposal for my boss, which would allow me to move to the Laguna Beach area in Southern California as a sales representative in that market. To my relief and surprise, he said yes. I was the first outside salesperson for my company in Laguna Beach. I could work better hours and finally have my weekends free. In fact, I would be able to work from home, set my own hours, and still make more money. This new situation was by far better for me and my boys. Sean had torn his ACL in his second or third wakeboarding accident, another drug-related incident where he thought he was Superman and ended up seriously hurting himself. He moved to Wisconsin to have his parents take care of him and wasn't helping me raise Hudson at all. I told Sean I was moving to California and asked if I could take Hudson with me. To my complete surprise, Sean said he would move back to Arizona and raise him. I was shocked. A part of me was glad Hudson would have his dad around, but a bigger part of me knew he should be with me. Sean couldn't care for himself, let alone Hudson. However, I agreed, knowing legally I really didn't have a choice. According to Arizona law, the parent who moves 100 miles away or further loses full custody. Based on Sean's track record, I was hopeful this would be a short-term arrangement. On September 27th, 2012, I moved to California with Jacoby, longing to bring Hudson with me as soon as possible. I had arranged to stay with a coworker for a few weeks until I could figure out where exactly in Orange County I would live. I was excited about the new opportunities ahead of me, but I was still very tired and felt everything about my life was hard. I didn't have both of my kids with me. My clothes were all in boxes and I was sleeping on a coworker's couch. Self-doubt started creeping in and I began questioning my self-worth. Why do I have this crazy backstory to my life? I asked myself. I sat on the couch before I fell asleep that night and whispered out loud, "What's the point of all of this?" Chapter 27, Fighting for Me. The very next morning, I woke up and heard a deep voice, clear as day, that said, "Start a nonprofit." I didn't even know what a nonprofit was. If I'd heard the word before, it definitely wasn't part of my vocabulary. I sat up on the couch and started with a simple Google search. I was surprised by how many nonprofits I had used throughout my life without even knowing it. As a Jehovah's Witness, we hadn't been taught to do community service, and they never used that term. Immediately, I knew the purpose of my nonprofit. I've gone through years of sexual abuse. I'm going to use that experience to help others. I had a calling. All those years of suffering and praying for God to miraculously remove me from my home were for a reason. I had the privilege to take my trauma and put together an organization that would help other sexual abuse survivors not simply survive, but thrive. I had always believed I had a responsibility to do something with my childhood sexual abuse, but I finally knew exactly what that was. Pretty early on into my search about how to create a nonprofit, it became apparent that the steps for filing were complicated. How am I, as a single parent who works full-time, going to figure it all out? I hired a company that day to help me file for a 501c3. It was a commitment of $3,000 to file for total compliance, almost twice the cost of a partial compliance option, which would have limited me to raising only $10,000 annually. The sky should be the limit, I decided. I believe God gave me an oomph to really go after this dream and make it huge. There were many details to sort out, so I started to clarify the basic functions of my organization. Through my nonprofit, sexual abuse survivors would be able to get free counseling for as long as they needed it. Friends and family members of anyone who had been sexually abused would be able to get free counseling too. My plan would be to have counseling offices in every major city throughout the entire United States. A simple internet search indicated at least 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before they reach age 18. Because sexual assault is an incredibly underreported crime, those numbers don't even tell the whole story. I wanted my organization to help everyone, especially men who often don't feel comfortable seeking help for their abuse. Many sexual abuse survivors turn to drugs, alcohol, abusive relationships, prostitution, or suicide to escape their painful past. I knew from experience that while the effects of sexual abuse do not just go away, through professional counseling, a person dealing with the pain of sexual abuse can find their footing again and regain their confidence to be who they should be. They can choose a good partner and raise well-adjusted children. I was ready to finally offer a solution to sexual abuse. The plans for my organization started to take shape, but it needed a name. For weeks, I kept notes on my phone, trying different ideas and checking to see if the domain names were available. Nothing was clicking. As I was brushing my teeth one morning, I had a light bulb moment when the name Fighting for Me popped into my head. I ran into the living room in a frenzy, toothbrush in my mouth and cheeks full of foaming toothpaste. I was still staying with a coworker who was hosting other visitors on the couch. I whipped open my laptop to learn that www.fightingforme.org was available. I purchased it immediately and celebrated with the strangers in the living room. I knew I looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. My organization had a name. I believed in that moment what I still know to be true. Fighting for Me will be a beacon of hope and a sign that times have changed. No longer will we hear of someone being sexually abused and simply respond, "I'm sorry," or "Oh yeah, that happened to me too." Gone will be the days of sitting idly on the sidelines while perverted creeps steal our innocence, our lives, our peace, and our opportunity to become who we are meant to be. Fighting for Me is here. Fighting for Me will be the go-to resource for overcoming sexual abuse. People will finally know what to do when they need help overcoming sexual abuse, or when someone they love is struggling with being sexually abused. They make an appointment to get free counseling and face it head on. Fighting for Me will be everything I wish my family and I had when the trauma of sexual abuse ripped through our lives and flipped us all on our heads. I dream of predators choosing not to sexually abuse children for fear they will land themselves in jail when that child contacts Fighting for Me. We will not be in the business of catching bad guys, but we will make a dent in the number of people who are abused by empowering children, men, and women to find their voices. Instead of being silenced by shame, they will speak up and hopefully even report their abusers when it's a safe choice. While I can't completely eliminate sexual assault because I can't control people, I know registered sex offenders will have a harder time claiming victims than non-registered sex offenders, and holding sexual predators accountable can be a part of the healing process for survivors. Whether or not Fighting for Me clients choose to report, or whether they see a conviction after they report, the very act of breaking their silence is something I hope every survivor experiences. Little by little, the idea of Fighting for Me became a clearer vision in my mind. As I built this organization, I had no idea what I was doing. I had only ever worked for other people and didn't know anything about the nonprofit world. Yet in 8 months, I went from not having a clue how nonprofits worked to forming a board, incorporating, and naming my organization. The craziest part to me was when other people started catching my vision and signing up to help. After describing Fighting for Me over coffee, the very people I probably scared with my toothbrush frenzy actually believed in my organization so much they became our first secretary and treasurer. I wasn't alone on this journey anymore. I had a team. Fighting for Me was a dream now coming to fruition. Chapter 28, Almost Perfect. My life was starting to come together. I could have afforded my own apartment, but I had an impossible time choosing where to live in Orange County. Instead, I opted to get acquainted with the area a little longer before making a long-term commitment. On Craigslist, I found a room in Mission Viejo available to rent for $600 a month. When I called about seeing the room, a man who was very hard to understand answered. He kept asking me how long it would be until I arrived because he needed to go to the gym. Because I was already in Mission Viejo, he agreed to wait for me. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed the front door was far from the street. I tightened the strap on my high heels and left my car unlocked just in case I needed to run back. I knocked, and a tall, handsome man with big muscles and cute, big ears sticking out from his head answered the door. "My name is Luis, but my friends call me Lucho," he said. "Okay, Lucho, where do I sign?" I replied. I had 4 roommates who were all working professionals, Lucho and 3 other women. I worked from home and hardly ever saw anyone. I enjoyed having the huge house all to myself. I settled into a new routine. In the morning, I would take Jacoby to school and then make sales calls from home. I would finish by 3 o'clock, spend the following hour going for a run, and then pick Jacoby up. Hudson was 5 and would fly out to see me on school breaks. I had my boys, a job I loved, and a beautiful new city to call home. When Hudson was in town, my boys and I all shared one room and a bed. Even though our circumstances could have been improved, we enjoyed the new arrangement and had fun together. I picked Hudson and Jacoby up from the Montessori every day, and then we'd go to the park at the end of our street. They'd play until it was time for dinner. When we got home, they showered while I cooked, and after we ate dinner together, we got to pick out a movie. The boys watched their movie until they fell asleep while I stayed up working on Fighting for Me. Every night, I sat in the living room poring over every detail of my nonprofit. I worked hard to perfect my mission and vision. My tax exemption application required a massive amount of work. The company I hired to help me make sense of the legal filing gave me incremental checklists to complete. I always had a good amount of homework to do. My mind was on fire, consumed with this project. I'd have to force myself to close my laptop and go to bed because I loved working on Fighting for Me so much. Most nights I was alone in the living room and only saw one of my roommates as they came in the front door and immediately made their way up to their rooms. I rarely saw anyone in shared spaces. I found it strange to know each bedroom had someone in it, but we wouldn't bump into each other in the kitchen or watching television. Life was good. Not perfect, but good. I felt my life was finally heading in the right direction. As I drove to dental offices for sales appointments, I kept noticing churches on every corner. I really wanted to find a church of my own, but I had no idea how to figure out which one to go to. And I was too scared to just go without knowing what to do once I got there. My desire to know God was increasing, and I was sure if I could just find the right building, the right church, He would be there. My new landlord and roommate, Lucho, cracked a rib while playing soccer and was required to rest for 2 months. I started seeing a lot more of him at home. We got along well and would talk for hours. I was completely honest about my wild life, never making any excuses for my behavior in the past. He listened to it all and would even offer advice about dealing with my ex-husband. "Don't fight him, just make a stable home for your kids," he would tell me. "In time, Hudson will want to live with his mommy." I wanted to believe him, but I wasn't convinced. Lucho loved to watch singing shows. As the season came around for X Factor, American Idol, and The Voice, I finally had company in the living room. I would work on my laptop while Lucho watched his shows. We often chatted about past relationships, friends, and life lessons we had learned. Lucho was from Peru and had a sexy Latin accent. Sometimes we struggled to understand each other, but thanks to my high school Spanish, we always figured out what we were trying to say. I thought he was handsome, intelligent, and funny. He was very respectful and kind to my kids. One time I was busy cleaning our bedroom when he made a Peruvian dish, served both my boys a plate, and sat on the picnic bench outside to eat lunch with them. I was surprised that a single man with no kids would even think to feed children. I was impressed but remained guarded. I didn't want him to think he could be nice to my kids and win me over. I was skeptical of him because of my bad choices in the past. Eventually, Lucho and I began to date. but I was terrified of ending up in another abusive, controlling relationship. We were on and off. If he asked me why I didn't answer the phone, I would break up with him. It probably seemed extreme to him, but I didn't care. I had 2 boys to protect. He was too good to be true. I didn't believe I had found a gorgeous Latin man who was truly all about me and my kids. Being a family man came naturally to Lucho, but I kept telling myself he was pretending to be this perfect man until we got more serious, and then his true colors would come out. Because of my doubts and fears, we broke up and made up a few times. I had driven by a Mormon church at least 100 times on my sales route and finally stopped one day to find out their service times. I wasn't interested in their doctrine, so I started attending their Spanish service, which allowed me to have a sense of belonging without the mind-numbing pain of their theology. It was my feeble attempt at building some sort of community for myself and my kids. One Sunday morning, I was getting my kids ready to go to the Spanish Mormon service when Lucho came running outside and asked if he could join us. Yes, but hurry up, we're going to be late, I told him. He came back with his Bible and jumped in the car. I understood practically nothing at the service. Lucho, of course, understood everything. On the way home, he explained that they were teaching things that were not in the Bible and that this wasn't the way to know God. I didn't want to hear it. I already knew he was right, but I was so tired of listening to what everyone thought was the way and the truth. He suggested we check out a Christian church in Aliso Viejo he'd heard about. As it turns out, the gym Lucho had been in a hurry to get to the day I called about renting a room was actually his brother's garage gym. A neighbor had made it a point to walk over and invite Lucho and his brother to her church, Calvary Chapel, Pacific Hills, just about every time they were working out together. I was so excited Lucho had a solution. Yes, I'd love that, I said. We checked out the church that week. I was hooked by how real Pastor Dave was. He wore a Harley Davidson t-shirt, which, coming from my religious background, threw me off for a minute. I was intrigued. He taught the Bible and shared shocking, unflattering stories about himself as examples of pointing how other people messed up. He used the word stupid from the pulpit, which cracked me up. I got the feeling that he was exactly the same off stage as he was on stage, and I loved that. I could trust it. I could finally hear what the man at the front of the church was teaching because it was really all about Jesus and not the pastor. My happiness with Lucho was short-lived as I once again got cold feet about our growing relationship and called it off another time. I really needed to be sure I was choosing Lucho because he was the one, and not just because he was the one right in front of me. Everything was going great, but I was scared to death of making another bad choice. That last time I broke up with Lucho, I could tell something in him changed. He was no longer trying to win me back and was giving me my space. He remained polite, but had become distant. I missed him, but I waited a couple weeks to make sure I was missing him for the right reasons and not just because I was comfortable with him. After the boys were asleep one night, I got busy taking apart the kitchen, washing the cupboards, and rearranging the dishes. Those types of projects are enjoyable for me and help me clean the clutter out of my head as I clean my living space. It's a win-win. I sent Lucho a text that said, "I miss you." He said, "Really? Let's talk at home." Usually he was ready with open arms to begin our relationship again. His response was anything but typical for him, and I knew I had hurt him this time. I understood, though, and I was glad he had enough self-respect to question my decision to reach out to him. We made up once again and continued dating, and this time it was better than ever. While I was out on sales meetings one day, Lucho called to invite me to a soccer game. I immediately stopped working, rushed home to change into workout clothes, and went to the field to watch him before I had to pick Jacoby up from school. When he scored a goal, he kissed his fingers and threw his kiss to me. I got butterflies in my stomach. I can't believe this guy's flirting with me in front of his friends. Isn't he afraid they're going to tease him? Lucho and I spent the holidays together with his brother and sister, along with their extended family. As we were getting ready to go to his cousin's house on Christmas Eve, I asked, "So, am I your girlfriend?" He got this huge smile on his face. "Wait a minute," Lucho said. "Let me do this the right way." He sat up and said in a serious tone, we've been seeing each other for a little while now and we like each other and I want to know if you want to be my girlfriend. I was so impressed. What a gentleman. That night, we went to the Christmas party as an official couple, and I felt incredible. We dated for months, and I felt secure and happy. I knew where I belonged in life. On my 32nd birthday, Lucho took me to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Dana Point. We had delicious appetizers overlooking the ocean and celebrated with champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. I could hardly believe I had found such an incredible man. When we finished eating, we went for a romantic walk around the hotel just above the ocean. We came to a gazebo with 2 chairs facing the west, perfect for watching the sunset. As we sat down, we oohed over how it seemed as if the chairs had been set up just for us. Everything was absolutely perfect. As the sun began to set, we walked to the rail at the edge of the cliff to get a closer look. We took pictures of the sky filled with the bright orange, yellow, pink, and red. I got lost in the colors, and when I turned to say something to Lucho, he was on his knee holding a Tiffany's box with a breathtaking yellow diamond ring and white diamond eternity band. He even had custom gold stabilizer bars built in to fit my skinny fingers. I was speechless. I wish I could remember what he said, but all I know is when he asked me to marry him, I said yes. It was the best birthday gift ever. We were married in a small chapel at Laguna Hills Civic Center a couple weeks later, and 3 months after that, we had a large formal wedding at the St. Regis Resort in Dana Point, California. Lucho had been a hotel employee since the day they opened in 2001. He had seen thousands of weddings and made sure ours was a day fit for a queen. Every detail was perfect, from the ceremony on the grand lawn overlooking the Pacific Ocean to the yellow rose petals adorning the aisle to the perfectly orchestrated dinner and dancing. It was truly a remarkable day I couldn't have imagined I would ever experience. I asked my stepdad, Rick, to walk me down the aisle, and he agreed immediately. After all these years of blaming him for all my pain that he didn't cause and couldn't have known about, I was finally at peace with him and realized he was there for me all my life. While perhaps it wasn't always in the ways I wanted, he did fulfill his fatherly duties to me. He fed me, clothed me, disciplined me, and even bought me my first car. Even though this was my 3rd marriage and a lot of people had a lot to say about it, Rick never hesitated to give me away. If I ever needed him, he was there for me. Who gives this woman to be married? The pastor asked. Rick replied, her mother and I do. I had to fight back tears. The emotion was almost too much for me to handle. I wished more than anything my mom could have been there, and now, thanks to my stepdad, she was. Lucho and I planned to have a baby right away, so we were 2 months pregnant by the time our big day came. During the cake cutting ceremony, we surprised everyone with the announcement we were expecting. Una para mí, I said in my best Spanish as I took a bite of cake. Then I took another bite and added, y una para el bebé. 1 bite for me and 1 for the baby. The reception erupted in cheers. We were all overjoyed. Lucho is by far one of the best things that has ever happened to me. He has loved me more than I knew was possible for a man to love a woman. He is sensitive, romantic, and generous. He loves taking care of me and our boys more than anything else. I never have to guess how he feels about me because he tells me he loves me, what a great mommy I am, and how beautiful I am all the time. Life was finally everything I had dreamed of as a little girl. I had an adoring husband, healthy kids, and I got to stay home and enjoy them. During this pregnancy, I was severely anemic and could sometimes sleep 20 hours a day. I was too tired to even eat. Progress on fighting for me came to a halt, and I honestly thought I was going to have to give up on my nonprofit because I was too exhausted to work on it. My husband would come home, find me asleep on the couch, kiss my forehead, and tell me, "Sleep, Mommy, you are working on something beautiful." I have never felt so loved. We had our first baby together and named him Oscar. It was incredible to watch Lucho hold his son for the first time. He had dreamed of getting married and having children since he was a teenager in Peru. Lucho was so in love with his baby boy and was instantly a great dad, incredibly loving and protective. We went to church most Sundays. About a year and a half after Lucho first took me to a Christian church, I was cautiously warming up to the pastor's messages. He seemed to consistently preach from the Bible without just stating his opinion as fact or sharing what he read in some other book or magazine. Out of all the churches I'd been to, that was a first for me. I was still skeptical, but I had a definite desire to know God. I'd been let down by the Jehovah's Witness religion in more ways than I wanted to think of. I couldn't talk myself into believing that the Book of Mormon was true, or that somehow the ceremonies performed in their temples made everything last forever, when the temple was built out of the same materials as the Walgreens across the street. I was still searching for answers, for truth, for God. One Sunday, I decided to ask Pastor Dave a question I had been wrestling with my whole life. After the service, I approached him and asked, if Jesus is God, then who was acting as God when Jesus was being born and was a baby? His answer was simply, I don't know. But that's what the Bible says happened, so I believe it to be true. We can't possibly understand God or all that God is capable of. If we could understand everything about God, he wouldn't be God. Wow. I'd spent most of my life feeling as if I needed to study the Bible or Book of Mormon to get every answer about God and my religion. And my pastor just told me that there was something he didn't know. I felt relieved. If he didn't know everything, then I didn't need to either. I didn't have to have it all figured out. Not knowing was okay. I could still have a relationship with God. That was a transformative day for me. It allowed me to approach my faith authentically instead of defensively. I was free to see and hear with new eyes and ears.